world at any given time. We could send a number of airplanes with materials and dispensing equipment we had, and probably control the weather all the way around the world.
Why? Because you said it was on. It's on seven major front lines.
Well, there are only from 5 to 7 major troughs around the world at any given time, and they undulate just like ocean waves, move back and forth and back and forth. And at any time, there's a front associated with those where all the thunderstorms are located. And with having a few airplanes, a couple of airplanes at the right place, you could run down that line of thunderstorms and do whatever you wanted to with them. This is out of the June 1974 Science magazine. And this article was actually written in it says it's written in 1974. Yeah, it was 1974. And this is when the Senate got wind that something had been going on in Vietnam that they didn't know about, and they wanted to know about it. Well, it's interesting to note that this project ended in 1972. It started in 1966. So you can see the secrecy. Senator Pale was a kind of aggressive senator about people doing things that the Senate didn't know about. He got wind of it and he asked for a briefing. And a Colonel Sasser, I believe his name may have been something else, but a colonel, Air Force colonel, gave them a briefing, gave his committee a briefing, and told them it had been going on since in a research configuration from 1966 to the present time. President Johnson was very mild. It turned out that he had known my father. So we had a little old homecoming there for just a few minutes. And then he asked me what I was doing and told me he had read and been briefed on what we were doing and how we were doing it. And he asked me my opinion of it and asked if I thought that we could continue that. I said, well, I see no reason why we can't continue it, because we'll have the same kind of weather coming up again in March of next year, and we can seed and make rain right into the monsoon system. And we can then extend the monsoon system well past this August end to maybe the first week in November. He didn't say a whole lot about it, except he thought it was he thought it was real weird, if you will, that people could take a little weather modification and change the whole climate in the country. When I came back to the States, where I had time to do something as far as weather modification was concerned, I went back to my duties, if you will, as being the military member of the Project Storm Fury Advisory Committee.
Without getting anything classified, can you tell us about some of the tests you did in China Lake?
Well, of course, in China Lake we had different manufacturers of these cloud seeding devices. We had different yields for them. We had different burn times on how fast we wanted to put all this nuclei out. And so we tested all those things in China Lake. We'd pick a cloud out in the middle of the desert out there. We had 100 miles test range out there that belonged to the weapons center. And we'd just pick a thunderstorm and go do what we wanted to with it. By 1969, we had all the latest state-of-the-art equipment in a number of airplanes, and we also had aircraft equipped with dispensing equipment to put silver iodide into a hurricane. The hypothesis for how to do this had been designed, developed by Dr. Joanne Simpson, and her husband, Dr. Robert Simpson, was the director of Project Storm Fury for a number of years. And we followed her hypothesis, which said that if you seed enough clouds in the right front quadrant of a hurricane where the energy cells are, you may build a second eye, or as a minimum make this original eye much bigger, which meant you have a reduction in wind velocity.
Tell us again Mr. Livingston, Ben, just exactly who Mr. Simpson is.
Dr. Simpson, at the time Project Storm Fury started, he was the head of the United States Weather Bureau. With the funds being made available for Project Storm Fury, they created a new department or new entity of government called the National Hurricane Research Center. And Dr. Simpson, Dr. Bob Simpson, was the director of that group.
So he's preeminent.
He is preeminent, and his wife Joanne, I attended a ceremony for her induction into the National Center for Atmospheric Research Laboratory's Wall of Fame last summer, in which her name was placed on the wall as one of the 5 preeminent scientists in the nation in the 20th century. That's his wife Joanne, who was the head of Project Storm Fury for the 2 years. I worked with her for those 2 years.
And they're saying right here that this is conclusive. Yes. So why aren't we saving people hundreds of millions of dollars and thousands of lives? This needs to be implemented.
This book, Hurricane Watch here, is very important because it's written by a person who's a former director of the National Hurricane Center. So he's had worlds of experience in the research in these things. And I might add that I took Dr. Bob Sheets on his first airplane ride into a hurricane in 1964. But he has documented a number of things that are important to the subject we're talking about, in which he's described every storm, the background to those storms, what was done to them, and the results. He's also described Dr. Bob Simpson. He says, all in all, Bob Simpson undoubtedly has had more impact on hurricane research and forecasting than any other single person. And I might add the second most important person in this direction or this field is his wife, Dr. Joanne Simpson.
Ben, what do you say to the folks that say, oh, well, if you mess with a hurricane, that might cause some unintended consequence? You know, as if that energy has to go somewhere. Doesn't it just dump into the ocean as cold water?
It may just spread out and blow across the ocean. It may not go anywhere where anyone cares. And there's certainly going to be, if there are going to be unintended consequences, you would know within an hour after you'd seeded a hurricane, you would know that something is not going right. We have to go do something different before it causes damage.
So you'd have days to be adjusting.
You'd have days. The way we plan on doing it, we'd only have 2 days. We'd only work on a hurricane.
Well, this is a pretty exact science now, from Vietnam to the hurricanes you did earlier. Seems like, I mean, you guys know how to knock them out.
Well, for the operation we hoped to get last fall, I wrote a flight plan for every flight. How far they would go, how many partakers they would take, and statistically, how many nuclei they needed to spend.
How many tons of nuclei would it have taken? You said 2 airplanes, but how many tons of nuclei would it have taken? How many airplanes to knock out Rita or Katrina?
You don't measure these partakers in terms of tons. You measure them in terms of half pounds. So a cloud seeding device with 14 grams of silver iodide mixture in it that produces 10 to the 13 nuclei per gram weighs about 1/3 of a pound. So 400 of those things weighs 120 pounds. The composition of a hurricane may have dozens of energy cells in it, and they're like the pistons in an engine. They just chug, chug, chug. They get stronger and stronger and stronger because they feed off the warm air below them. And they eventually turn into this thing they call a hurricane with all of these energy cells in it. We know where those energy cells are. We know what makes them tick. We have the materials, if you will, to alter those energy cells and decrease the maximum surface winds in a hurricane. On August 18th in 1969, Hurricane Debbie was seeded 5 times at 2-hour intervals. And the maximum wind speeds it decreased from 115 to 80 miles per hour. That's a pretty remarkable reduction of more than 45% in damage reduction potential. The storm was left alone on the 19th, and on the 20th went back and seeded that cloud the second time and decreased the winds again to just under 100 miles per hour, or about 24% more damage reduction potential. The results from the Hurricane Debbie experiment seemed so positive that many individuals believed the project should go operational, seeding major hurricanes that threaten land. A team of scientists at Stanford Research Institute at Stanford University did a decision analysis on all past seeding events, including the 1961 and 1963 experiments. Dr. James Matheson of that group, reflecting their views, stated, "We claim they should consider seeding now if a big hurricane comes straight from Miami." These scientists said the government may have to accept responsibility for not seeding and thereby exposing the public to higher probabilities of severe storm damage and possible higher death tolls. A number of people, scientists if you will, who didn't necessarily endorse applications engineering in these storms. They thought they needed more scientific data. They demanded that a third party investigate all of what Storm Fury had done. Stanford University was the party or the institution that did this study of the activity Project Storm Fury had done. In summary, the results of the Hurricane Debbie experiments seemed so positive that many individuals believe the project should go operational, seeding major hurricanes that threatened any landmass. And a team of scientists at Stanford Research Institute did a decision analysis on all past seeding events, including the ones in 1961, 1963. And Dr. Matheson from Stanford University, the head of the Research Institute, reported that the government may have to accept responsibility for not seeding and thereby exposing the public to higher probabilities of severe storm damage and possible higher death tolls. It's interesting that we were able to do that and have the results confirmed by Stanford University in 1969. Since 1947, the government has used the logic or reasoning that liability is a killer for weather modification. But that's not why Project Storm Fury was killed, and that's not why they aren't doing it now. In my opinion, the reason they're not doing it is well stated by a very senior official from the National Center of Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado, and he says, even if a well-supported theory of hurricane modification existed, the potential legal aspects of weather modification on this scale argue strongly, in my opinion, against any such efforts. Just a few of the many possibilities include: A, the storm is not modified at all, but some people perceive that it is, get hurt, and sue the modifiers. The storm is modified according to theory, but still does significant damage, and some people blame the modification on the damage, even though the modification actually reduced the overall damage and impact. And third, the modified storm produced winners and losers, and the perceived losers sue. For example, what if soon after the seeding the hurricane abruptly changed course? This happens all the time in nature. The people affected by the new course might well blame the modification effort and sue. Yeah, if you study the situation, you may learn, and very diabolically so, that you don't like to believe this, but there's a possibility, and the economics of it verifies the fact that there is so much damage done that the construction industry in general all over the United States benefits because the cost of material goes up. So the insurance company may or may not gain from having these damage reductions take place. As far as